For decades, innocent people sat behind bars for crimes they did not commit, while the real killers walked free. Lives were destroyed, families were broken, and faith in justice slowly faded. These cases were built on weak evidence, false confessions, mistaken eyewitnesses, and flawed investigations. But time has a strange way of revealing the truth. With modern DNA technology, new witnesses, and determined lawyers, many wrongful convictions were finally overturned, exposing shocking failures in the justice system. These are the stories of cold cases where the truth finally came out, and innocent lives were given back after years or even decades of silence. In 1984, 9-year-old Christine Jessup was murdered in Canada. A young man named Guy Paul Morin was accused based on weak forensic evidence and public pressure. He was convicted and sent to prison, even though there was no solid proof against him. For years, he fought to prove his innocence while his life slowly fell apart. In the 1990s, DNA testing finally proved that the evidence at the crime scene did not belong to Morin. He was fully exonerated in 1995. Decades later, in 2020, police finally identified the real killer through preserved biological evidence. After 35 years, the truth replaced one of the most tragic miscarriages of justice in Canadian history. In 1983, 15-year-old Kirk Bloodsworth was convicted of murdering a 9-year-old girl in Maryland. There was no physical evidence linking him to the crime, but eyewitness testimony convinced a jury. He was sentenced to death. For 9 years, Bloodsworth sat on death row, waiting to be executed for a crime he did not commit. In 1992, DNA testing on preserved evidence finally proved his innocence. He became the first death row inmate in the United States to be exonerated by DNA. The real killer was later identified. Bloodsworth walked free after nearly a decade of living under a death sentence. In 1984, 16-year-old Gregory Taylor was convicted of murdering a woman in North Carolina. The case was built on shaky witness statements and hidden evidence. He spent 17 years in prison, losing his youth, his family, and his future. In 2010, a federal investigation revealed that police had withheld critical evidence that proved his innocence. Taylor was finally released and later received a full pardon. His case exposed the deep corruption within the police department and showed how easily justice can fail when the truth is hidden. In 1989, 5 teenage boys were arrested for the brutal assault of a jogger in Central Park, New York. Known as the Central Park Five, they were pressured into giving false confessions after hours of interrogation. There was no DNA evidence linking them to the crime, but they were convicted anyway. They spent between 6 and 13 years in prison. In 2002, a serial rapist named Matias Reyes confessed to the crime, and DNA testing confirmed his guilt. The 5 men were finally exonerated, and one of the most famous wrongful convictions in American history was exposed. In 1977, a man named Anthony Ray Hinton was arrested for 2 murders in Alabama. The case against him relied entirely on flawed ballistics evidence and a poor defense lawyer. He was sentenced to death and spent 30 years on death row, much of it in solitary confinement. In 2015, modern forensic experts proved that the bullets from the crime scene did not match Hinton's gun. He was finally released at the age of 60, after losing 3 decades of his life to a crime he never committed. In 1991, a teenager named Juan Rivera was convicted of murdering an 11-year-old girl in Illinois. There was no physical evidence linking him to the crime, but he gave a false confession after hours of police interrogation. He was sentenced to life in prison. In 2011, DNA testing proved that the evidence at the crime scene belonged to another unknown male. Rivera was finally released after spending 20 years behind bars. His case exposed how easily false confessions can destroy innocent lives. In 1985, a man named Clarence Branley was accused of murdering a white teenage girl in Texas. Police told him, "One of you two is going to hang. Since you're the black one, you're elected." He was convicted and sentenced to death. For 10 years, he sat on death row while evidence proving his innocence was ignored. In 1990, his conviction was overturned after it was revealed that key evidence had been hidden and witnesses had been coerced. Branley was finally freed after nearly a decade on death row for a crime he did not commit. In 1998, a man named Calvin Willis was convicted of raping a 3-year-old girl in Louisiana. The case was built on weak testimony and a rushed investigation. He was sentenced to life in prison. In 2004, DNA testing proved that Willis was innocent. He was finally released after 6 years behind bars. His case showed how quickly an innocent person can be destroyed when police rush to close a case instead of searching for the truth. In 1994, a man named Darrell Hunt was convicted of murdering a newspaper editor in North Carolina. There was no physical evidence linking him to the crime, but unreliable witnesses testified against him. He was sentenced to life in prison. In 2004, DNA testing finally proved that Hunt was innocent. He was released after spending 19 years behind bars. His wrongful conviction exposed deep racial bias and serious flaws in the justice system. In 1987, a man named Glenn Ford was convicted of murder in Louisiana and sentenced to death. The prosecution hid evidence that pointed to another suspect. He spent 30 years on death row before his conviction was overturned in 2014. Ford was finally released, but he died just a year later from cancer. He walked free, but he never truly got his life back. His case showed how devastating wrongful convictions can be, even when the truth finally comes out. In 1976, a man named Michael Morton was convicted of murdering his wife in Texas. Prosecutors hid evidence that proved his innocence, including witness statements that described another suspect. He spent 25 years in prison while his young son grew up without him. In 2011, DNA testing finally identified the real killer. Morton was released, and the prosecutor who hid the evidence was later disbarred. After more than 2 decades, the truth finally destroyed a massive injustice. In 1991, a man named Rolando Cruz was convicted of murdering a young girl in Illinois. There was no physical evidence against him, but police claimed he had described details of the crime in a dream. He was sentenced to death. In 1995, his conviction was overturned after it was revealed that police had lied and hidden evidence. Cruz was finally acquitted, and the officers involved were later charged. His case exposed how fantasy, lies, and corruption can destroy innocent lives. These wrongful conviction cases prove that the justice system is not perfect. Mistakes happen. Lies are told. Evidence is hidden. Innocent people suffer while the guilty go free. Every exoneration is a reminder that truth matters more than closing a case quickly. Behind every overturned conviction is a story of pain, patience, and hope. Innocent people who refused to give up, families who never stopped fighting, lawyers who worked for years without giving up. Justice may arrive slowly, but when it does, it changes everything. Some innocent people lost 10 years of their lives. Some lost 20, some lost 50. Some never truly recovered. Even after being freed, many struggled with trauma, health problems, and a world that had moved on without them. Freedom came too late for many of them, but at least the truth finally came out. These stories are not just about crime. They are about human failure, about broken systems, about the terrifying reality that anyone can be wrongfully convicted. When a cold case exposes the truth, it is not just a legal victory, it is a warning to never stop questioning the system. As we come to the end of today's journey, take a moment to think about the people behind these stories. They were not just case numbers. They were sons and daughters, husbands and wives, fathers and mothers whose lives were stolen by injustice. For decades, their families lived with shame, pain, and silence, knowing their loved one was innocent, but unable to prove it. These cases remind us that justice is not always fast and it is rarely easy. Sometimes it takes 10 years, sometimes it takes 30, sometimes it takes 50. But the truth has a way of surviving. A single piece of DNA, a hidden document, a new witness, or an honest investigator can suddenly bring light into the darkest places. What once seemed impossible becomes real, and silence finally turns into answers. To every innocent person who never stopped fighting, to every lawyer who refused to give up, and to every investigator who finally exposed the truth, these victories belong to you. Because of your strength and patience, lies were finally destroyed, and justice was finally restored. If these stories moved you, remember that there are still thousands of wrongful conviction cases waiting for their moment of truth. Somewhere, another innocent person is still sitting in a prison cell, hoping that one day the world will finally listen. Thank you for spending this time with us and honoring the memories of those who suffered under injustice. If you believe in justice and in the power of truth, don't forget to like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to the channel for more real stories that prove one powerful message. No matter how long it takes, the truth always finds a way to come out.